Today, I get to interview Joe Spanier, who happens to hold the unique title of third employee at Lightburn. Let's go. Now, this interview was originally presented as part of the Laser Livestream, and you can find that episode right here, but in a more condensed version, focusing just on the laser stuff. Joe has an incredible history as a maker, as well as hosting a podcast called Makers on Tap. While we didn't have the time to tell his whole story on the Laser Livestream, it's presented in full here for your interest. If you're only interested in small snippets of his story, feel free to go to the description below and click the time code on the area of your interest. For now, here is the whole unedited interview with Joe Spanier. Joe, how are you? It's so good to have you here on the Laser Livestream.
I am excellent. I'm super happy to be here.
Thank you. I mean, look, you know what? It's kind of fun to connect with people, especially people that you see on social media. You've had quite a footprint in the maker world, especially on YouTube, with your involvement with Makers on Tap and then your own work, as well as your ongoing work in the laser field. So there's a lot of things we're going to cover here, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, whatever. I never get to sit on this side of the screen, so like I'm game for everything.
All right, we're gonna
have fun.
We're gonna put you on the rack. We're gonna tighten up the screws. We're gonna get all the information we can. And again, it's so great because here on the live stream, we're based in Australia. As much as we love reaching out to everyone across the globe, we're here. The people that I kind of speak to and frequent are kind of really local, and then it's always a thrill to hear a little bit about what's going on the other side of the world. It seems that America seems to be that focus for all things technology.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because such a small amount of that technology is actually made here, but it all like comes here. I don't know. It's weird.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it. If it wasn't for the for Darkly Labs and the Blazer, everything that I work with in my office you see behind me it's all coming. It's all being shipped in. Therefore, high prices. As most Australians are probably going, yeah, Skill, it costs us more. I don't know why, but that's the way it is.
Yeah.
So, Joe, let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you your foray into making and the maker community?
Yeah. So my professional degree is in industrial engineering, and for like the last 18 or so years, I've been programming CNC machines, lathes, mills, gear generating machines, as well as industrial robots. And what kind of like shoved me into the maker scene beyond just like building things my whole life, like building skateboarding ramps with my dad, and like building enclosures for reptiles and stuff, which like all of the animals that you guys have that you think are pest animals in Australia are like my favorite things. Like carpet pythons are my favorite snakes to keep as pets, and like I would really like to have a pet lace monitor at some point. And
wow.
Like, you guys are like, no, just get them away.
It's funny. You're the second person that I know from the US. I had a friend of mine in university. He came to study medicine, and his hobby was like collecting snakes and spiders, and he'd have all these Tupperware containers with all these animals that he took care of. And we would go out on a weekend, especially at the start of summer. I think that was the time because they all would start kind of going into hibernation. So they were still near the surface, but they were dopey enough that he could grab them. And I asked him once, how did this start? Because he was from New York, and he's like, I found a little snake in a park, and I smuggled it into my room as like a 6-year-old. And his mother found it and just freaked out. And that was his love of all this. I guess we take it for granted. In fact, when we're younger, we're taught, leave it alone. Like, when I went...
Well, I mean, yeah. Everything wants to kill you there, right?
Well, not really, to be honest with you. When I first came to Los Angeles, people were like, do you know the crocodile hunter? He's amazing. And I'm like, no. And they showed me, like, I think it was on The Tonight Show or something. And I was like horrified. And like he's grabbing this thing and he's like sticking his fingers where it shouldn't and all the rest of it. And they're like, isn't he amazing? And I'm like, dude, no one does that in Australia.
Yeah.
We're told just like a snake comes, just let it go. Let it go. So
absolutely. That's what normal people should do. But like that's how I got into making and stuff. And then what really like shoved me into like the whole digital fab thing was I was probably 4 years into the whole industrial engineering automation thing, and I realized that as I was sitting at my desk dreading writing my next CNC program and scrolling through a fish keeping forum called Monster Fish Keepers, and planning out my next fish tank, that I really needed to figure out a way to make my work my hobby so that I didn't get fired. And I was talking to one of the guys that I worked with, and he was like, oh, there's these machines, I think they're called like Sherlines or something.
Sherline lathes.
Yeah.
Australian lathe, baby. Look at the Australian link right here.
Really?
So
I didn't realize that.
There's a little bit of a story on that, and again, this was not set up at all, but Sherline happened to be made by a guy who I tried to get an interview with. I believe his name's Mark Silby, and he lived in the same neighborhood that I grew up in. So he was literally down the road, and he was an engineer who understood lathes and realized that there was a market for miniature versions of these lathes.
Absolutely.
And because they were all made literally from steel pieces that you could buy off the rack, like steel blanks, and he made them, and then he had a deal with, I believe it was Sears, the department store.
Yeah.
And that took off. And in fact, the government here put money behind it because it created jobs in Australia. He was making all the Sherline 400, which is the standard one. And they were like, yeah, cool. And then it just got to a point where I believe that someone in America wanted to buy up the company. And that's what Sherline is today, is, an American company that is still taking that basic design and developed it, added CNC, added, all the different pieces. And I believe at that point, Mark Silby kind of realized he missed his kind of lightning in a bottle. So he did come up with another lathe that used a 12-volt railway transformer as power. And I believe that was to circumvent whatever the agreement was of selling these lathes, but they never really took off in the same way. And I actually have a blue 400 Silby lathe, which is, the blue ones were made in Australia. So and I love that machine. It's a proper working lathe. I mean, you can do everything with it. So for quite some time, I was very, very fanatical about the Sherline lathes. Again, it's interesting because, as I was saying before, the prices on the Sherlines coming back into Australia are astronomical. So just the 400, close to $1,000 just for the base unit, which I think is, I think that it's about $400 or $500 in the US. And I know that many times when I was traveling, I would pick up little accessories and put them in my pocket and just bring them back and like leave them in the workshop. But yeah, I tried a few times to reach out to him, and I would love to hear that story. But he was kind enough to actually reply and say, I'm not really interested in talking about it.
Yeah, fair.
Amazing that comes up. Wow.
Yeah. So he told me about those, and I Googled them, and then I ended up finding a few small CNC like DIY plans. I think the one that I ended up building was called Rockliff.
Right.
And I think it was like the Rockliff A, but it was a fixed gantry thing. But then, as I was Googling around, I found another company called Probotics, and they sold the electronics for the CNC machines. And it turned out they were based about 4 miles from where I worked.
Amazing.
So I called him up one day and I was like, hey, I want to buy your small NEMA 23 kit that you've got on special. And they were like, okay, what's your address? And I was like, I am in Peoria. I would like to come like buy this from you and meet you. And they were like, oh yeah, whatever. We'll be here till like 7 tonight. Just come on in. And, so I went and I met these guys, and it turned out I knew them. At least one of the main guys from like past life doing car stereos. And that turned into a small obsession that, like 12 years later, it's my life.
I love
it.
Yeah. It's so... Every time I speak to people, and before I was doing the Laser Livestream, I used to run a little thing called Makers Monday, where every Monday I try to interview someone and find someone's story, their maker story, and try to share it out to a wider audience. And I always love the synergy, because it's like you can talk about like the Sherline lathes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I never thought I'd talk about that, but there's like years of stuff in there. And in fact, getting that Sherline lathe took me to... We have a thing called TAFE here, which is kind of like university, but it's more like it's more focused on manual tasks and manual labor things. So if you want to become an engineer, you go to a university. But if you want to if you want to be a fitter and turner, or if you want to be a
that's called trade school here.
Trade school. That's the words that I was trying to. It originally started as trade school, and then they were like, no, it's university. Like you can get a degree or an associate degree in things. And I would go on a Thursday night and learn how to use a lathe, because even with the little Sherline lathe, I realized very quickly that if you didn't know what you were doing, these things you could lose body parts even on the Sherline. Yeah. So I was like, okay, maybe I need to learn a little bit more of it. And that introduced me to this whole new world where it was like, cool. Now that I have those skills, can I pair them up with like my mainstream skills, which was at the time cinematography, and the ability to go onto a set, and they were like, we've got this lens, but we can't fit it. We don't know have an adapter. And I'm like, give me the lens. And the next day walk in with something that works. And they were like, how did you do that? And you're like, oh,
you're a wizard, Harry.
Yeah, I have a lathe. I have access to a lathe, or I've got access to people who I can talk to about it. And I understand nodal points and where the focus length is and all the rest of it. And then people would be like, literally, it was like, that's magic. Like, making is the new magic. To understand these kind of industries and technology that comes more from manufacturing, and then bringing them down and making them bespoke to one or two items, or making as many as you want. So, it sounds very, very similar. The idea that you walked in and met people that you knew, and then, obviously, probably it wasn't, maybe I got it wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but you bought the kit, but that wasn't the last time you went to their factory or their shop front, right?
I still, like, we still talk today. Awesome. And, it's crazy. And the maker world is so, I don't want to say small, but it's small. Like once you like start getting into it, the network it's like 2 degrees from Kevin Bacon, but it's like 2 degrees from Gil, and it goes very quickly, and it's like, oh, well, I know that guy, and I know that guy, and I know that guy. Now you're at Adam Savage,
right?
And it's
that's another story altogether. But yeah, I mean, Adam has definitely become kind of a spokesperson for the maker community in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
but 10, 15 years ago, I remember a guy on a board talking about film props, which was again part of the interest that I had as to how do you make these things, or how are they're being made. And I just remember someone once saying to me, they're like, "Oh, you've got this thing, we want to buy from you, but it's not for me, it's for someone who's famous." And I'm like, "Who?"
Okay. And
they're like, "Okay, you can't tell anyone, but it's Adam Savage." I'm like, "Adam?" I'm like, I'll call him direct. Tell him to come speak to me. It's not a problem. I'll give it to him. It's it's like what? Like, he's famous now? Like,
that's funny.
Yeah, it was. And he called me up and he's like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, man. It's like, next time I'm in LA, you're gonna be there? Like, yeah, cool, man. Like, let's go have lunch and you can have it. It's not a problem. And it's a little harder to get a hold of him nowadays. But back in those days, especially since we had crossed paths with some of the work he had done in ILM, it was just people who kind of understood what you were interested in and you're passionate about that. And that's what I love about the maker community, and what I love about the community here on the Laser Livestream. All the laserologists are exploring the same interest. And I say it at the start of every stream. It's like we are so much stronger together than we are apart. Like it's like I've met people who have such incredibly refined skills in a certain area when it comes to lasers or setting out a design or programming or coding, and you kind of go, I don't know what the next step is, but let me get, I've got 1, 2, and 3 down. 4 and 5, I'm not too sure. 6, I know where to go when I get past 5. And then someone goes, hey, let me go help you out with that. And suddenly you get 4 and 5 just falling into place because they happen to have, a stronger knowledge base and points you to something that you didn't know existed.
Yeah. Well, that's like a friend of mine always says the maker community is built around radical acts of sharing.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we don't like hold our knowledge. We're just like,
if I can do it, why can't you?
Forcefully give it to you.
Absolutely. And that's what I loved about it. That's why I spent 10 years in the US and came back home, and I was like, I had just touched the maker community just in the last couple of months before I moved back. And it was through some universities that I was doing some work with and some really interesting people who were coming together and bringing people together to make with these kind of really interesting technology that had just touched the market. So I remember seeing like my first 3D printer that someone had made, and looking at the control boards, and you're like, you made that? Like that's a handmade board? And they're like, yeah. And you're like, I remember kind of feeling like that. There must have been something similar to those early days of Silicon Valley and home computing, where people were coming into the homebrew computer club with stuff that they cobbled together to show, wow, look what we could do. And Arduino, I remember seeing my first Arduino, and I was like, that's a microcontroller? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, so where do you burn into the PIC chip? And they're like, you don't. And I'm like, you mean I could change, I could iterate? Like I don't have to go and buy multiple chips and pull them out? And for those of you who don't know, before you had uploadable software onto a chip, you would actually have to burn your code onto what they call a PIC chip that would hardwire that one time. And if you had an error with it, you usually had to get really creative using electronics to get around whatever the error was, which could make your life miserable. Absolutely miserable. And I just remember seeing that going, I'm leaving. And I'm probably not going to get access to all of this sort of stuff. But returning, found that it took me about a year, but I remember walking into a place and go, oh my God, you're a Makerspace. And they were like, yeah. And I was like, cool. And they were like, I have a really good friend who has done incredibly well. And I remember him saying to me years in, he said, can you stop bringing your projects into the space? And I was like, wow, did I do something wrong? Was there like, did I cross a line? What's going on? He goes, look, here's the problem. You do really cool stuff, and when I see it, I don't do my stuff because I want to come and do your stuff. And I remember just saying to him, I'm like, that's cool. If you want, let's finish mine and let's work on yours. And I'm happy to work with you on yours too. Or we can go straight to yours now. And he was like, no, let's finish yours. And I learned so much from that collaboration that I realized that this community, as you said, the power of it is the freedom to go and share. There's no IPs, there's no disclosures, there's none of that. And you can engage almost instantaneously. Yeah.
Try and stop us.
Right.
Sometimes it's too much.
Sometimes. There's been kind of, I think, bumps in the road. I know that Tech Shop was one of those things where when we heard Tech Shop was closing down, I realized that was going to be a huge hurdle to get around, and no one's really picked up that mantle before, where someone with no knowledge can come in, do an induction, and then have someone with them who knows a little bit more to get the job done, which to me was like, that was heaven. That was nirvana for a maker.
Yeah. Tech Shop was pretty incredible. I have a really interesting story that I'll tell you offline about the closing of Tech Shop.
Okay, we'll do
but
that then. Everyone, right now, everyone's in the chat room going, "What's Tech Shop?" Like, I'm sure it's something that never came here, but I know a few people tried to bring it along.
Yeah, Tech Shop was if you took a makerspace and you gave it a business model, and they had what did they call those? Anyway, they had people that worked at Tech Shop that would effectively hold your hand while you worked through your project, or like help you get through the tools and stuff, or if you were doing something really stupid, they'd come stop you. Man, I really can't remember what they called them. They had great names. But the problem with Tech Shop was like fourfold. I think it was very expensive to join. The memberships were $100 to $150 a month, and then to use the tools, you had to go through very expensive coursework. That wasn't that long, but like the CNC router class I remember was like $100. So it was prohibitively expensive if you were a maker who was like starving artist level.
Yeah,
I hate that term, but like if you weren't a well-off like person, it was very prohibitively expensive, and that was ultimately their downfall, right? But they had
also a great way to wet your feet and get a result. So if you happen to be working full time, you had no experience in the maker community whatsoever, you had some disposable income that you wanted to send that way, and you wanted to understand what, let's say, a lathe or a CNC machine could do, and you knew what your outcome was, you could have that experience without having to go through the formal maker community, which you could do the same thing, but I just remember when I started, it took, what, was 2 months before anyone actually turned around and said, "Hi, what's your name? What are you doing?" Because everyone was so focused on their own projects. It wasn't rudeness. It was just, there are people's faces who will turn up one time and you'll never see them again. Well, they'll turn up twice and you'll never see them again. But if you consistently, a friend of mine who was the president of the Makerspace that I was involved with once said to me, "Gil, you turned up one time, you never left." Like, you just never left. Like, you realized that this was your place. And it took about 2 months before people went, "I recognize you. What are you working on? Cool. All right, have you tried this?" Or, here's another direction. So there is a little bit of that kind of, it's a little bit like, I guess, the Mr. Miyagi karate classes. Like, you got to go and do the wax on, wax off before you understand that it all comes together.
Yeah. There's definitely the angry monkness about community makerspaces, just because I think a lot of them end up getting jaded. Because so many people show up and they're like, "Well, why aren't you doing my project for me?" Or like, "Why don't you want to get in on the ground floor of my next big startup?" And we're just like, "No, we're tired and we just want to like make air-powered rockets in the back corner. You want to do that? You can hang out and build rockets with us." But
look, again, that synergy, I think any space, especially community-built spaces, you've got to be careful with the direction you want to go, and then the individual direction you want to go, and then there's a lot of crossover. I was approached by some people once who said, "Gil, you've been working in makerspaces for a long time. You help put them together, whether it's for councils or schools or organizations. We want to do a makerspace. We want you to run it." I said, "Absolutely no way." I said, "No, it's not for me," because it was always going in that situation. I knew it was going to take me away from the making, and I was going to become a manager. And I hate politics, so and I think there's a lot of people who would be really gifted in that area who could probably do something like that. But again, when it comes to understanding where your strengths are, and my day job, I sit there and it's a blessing to be able to empower and a whole lot of people to make stuff. But there are definitely times where I stand there going, "I want to make that too." And because you're leading it, or you're teaching, or whatever, you're managing the situation, and you can't really be on that ground floor of going through that experience. So, as much as I love engaging the public to come back and kind of really hone their maker, sometimes you kind of go, I need to take my love and passion and turn it back into the hobby instead of work.
Yeah, that's a really big thing. I found that. So my last big corporate job was running a corporate makerspace for Caterpillar.
There you
go. So I started it and I ran it, and I quit because I hated it. And,
okay. All right. Well, I mean, I can really appreciate that. I mean, my first real big job was, there's a library system here. The city of Melbourne, which is the local government here, wanted to put a makerspace in a new library that they made, which was supposed to be a technology library. And I was lucky enough, or honored enough, or whatever, to not be what they call the creative technologist for that space, but just to be a just one of the team. And within 4 months, the person who had that job was like, I'm quitting. Gil's the person you want. He's all over it. And then I was like, yeah, it's not so much fun now because you're dealing with all the problems and pretty much not getting the opportunity to bring all the fun back in. That seemed to be someone else who always would come in and be like, we have a laser. And it was like, yeah, okay, cool. I'm glad you heard me, but I didn't realize we were going to bring that in. So yeah, I feel for you on that one.
It's really interesting watching makerspaces get ran by managers versus community builders.
Sure.
Because there's a really big difference, and it's funny because when you see them get ran by managers, they get really efficient, and like money gets managed well, which is good because most makerspaces don't have that. And then when you see them built by community builders, everybody's super engaged, and like everything's kind of fun, and like there's lots of activity going around, and there's zero money. And
I know exactly what you're talking about. We've gone on a little bit of a tangent. I want to bring it back to the lasers, but I will say, no, that's fine.
Tangents.
No, that's okay. I have no problem with that. I think that, yeah, I agree 100%, and I think that also there has to be a balance. And as my favorite saying is, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. So you've got to have some money coming in, and the space that I am most emotionally attached to happens to be one of these spaces that struggles with for cash flow. But in saying that, it has been the place that I learned the most and the most engaging. So there was a model of a makerspace here that got, I think it was $2 million funding from the government to set itself up, and it was more along the tech shop, and they were looking at going to big corporations and saying, bring your design stuff here, and I don't think it ever really got up to speed. It was just one of those things, which is really unfortunate. It would have been great.
Yeah, it's always a great idea, but it never seems to pan out in the end. I've never seen one work for more than about 4 years, and that's kind of sad.
It is. But let's go. Let's. I've found it very interesting about talking about makerspaces, especially this, like the synergy. It's almost like parallel with what's going on in the States from my own experiences. Want to talk to you a little bit about going more towards the lasers, but in between this time, you also started a live stream on YouTube yourself called Makers on Tap. And I'd share with the audience what you were doing and what Makers on Tap was bringing to the maker community.
So Makers on Tap was a podcast that was started between two friends of mine and I, that was essentially the real reason it started was none of us agreed on the right way to do things, and we'd get in really fun arguments at the Makerspace late at night. And we decided one day that like we noticed that people would like hang out at the Makerspace to listen to us argue, and we were like, well, we should just record these and see if this turns into a thing.
Awesome.
And it did. And so it was, the three of us talking about making and running the Makerspace, and occasionally we would have guests on, or we would go to trade shows and do interviews with people. And it was an absolute blast. It ran for about 2 years. We have 99 episodes released.
Awesome.
And for the people that have been listening to that and are listening to me now, and going, Joe, when are you going to release another episode? I don't know. It's not dead.
I shouldn't laugh.
But yeah, it was a very, very fun show, and the three of us are still very good friends. I talk to Chris and Aaron literally every day, but life is a thing,
100%.
and but Makers on Tap was an absolute blast, and I would love to continue doing something in that vein, even if it's just sitting around talking about making stuff. It's just time and life and all of those things. So
you guys hit that formula, that trifecta. I mean, I think probably the most popular podcast in that realm is Making It with Jimmy Arista and Bob Claggett and David Picciuto, which again is three people talking about what they're passionate about and sitting down and talking about it. There seems to be three, and I've seen a lot of different kind of models on that, but it's always a blast to listen to people talking about what they're passionate about, especially when the areas they're discussing happens to cross over, or their specialties happen to lie in different areas. So anything, as far as I'm concerned, anything that allows people to go and get inspired to try something new, whether it's in the maker community or not, I think I'm all for it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't learn from enough people.
Yeah, it was really fun. What made it work well is the three of us weren't good at the same things. So Aaron is an absolute expert level programmer. I am really good at building machines and making them do my bidding. And Chris's background is in cosplay and cinematography. So
wow.
Between the three of us, it was like, what can't we do? And we always had really fun just discussions on different ways of solving problems, or different viewpoints on things like open source versus closed source. One of the recurring topics in the show is why we should or shouldn't use Adobe products for making things. Chris is very much in the Adobe everything camp, and Aaron and I are very much in the never, because whatever. And it was fun because the show spans actually probably closer to 3 years, and over 100 episodes, we became very different people.
Sure.
Our viewpoints changed quite a bit from the original shows. Aaron and I went from being open source zealots to maybe if it works, we should just buy it so we have time to do the things that we actually want to do. And it's fun to go through and rethink all of that stuff, and and see how our viewpoints changed and why. So yeah.
I just had last week a conversation with someone who's a PC guy and I'm a Mac guy. And I was a Mac guy literally on the second version of OS 10. I remember getting the next upgrade to OS 10 came in, 10 DVDs, that I had to load in on a Quicksilver machine that cost me $7,000. It was just ridiculous. And my fear was, I was so afraid of OS 10 when I first got it that for 6 months I used it as a Windows machine, just kind of logged into Windows, and I didn't want to learn, I didn't want to change. But once I understood that, the argument was, now I don't have to worry about everything else. I can just go do my work. And I was trying to explain that. And it's amazing to understand the processes behind it, but sometimes it's also worthwhile putting that money out so you don't have to worry about it.
Well, and the other thing is, after a while, Aaron and I both kind of became I don't want to be the person who builds my whole life around like being anti something. Like maybe we need to try the things and see why they work.
Sure.
And I was always very anti Mac until I started working for Lightburn, and I had to get a Mac so I could test on. Go. And now I have an iPhone and a MacBook and an iPad and
so right now the whole chat room is screaming. They're like, "What? Hold on, we got 20 minutes in, and now he's talking about the fact that he works with Lightburn." Well, that was the whole reveal, wasn't it? So, so just before we get
and look, Lightburn's on the screen,
100%. So before we get onto what you do, oh wow, he's got. See, I don't have a Lightburn hoodie. I got a Lightburn T-shirt. It's about 4 sizes too small now because of COVID, but I don't have a Lightburn hoodie. Let me just ask very, very quickly before we get into what you do on Lightburn for Lightburn. But where along this path do you come across laser technology and realize that this is something that you're interested in?
Oh, so probably. Trying to think if it was before we started the Makerspace or right after. About 7 years ago, I got a K40, and it was when K40s were like $1,000.
Yeah.
They hadn't like reached that like super low, super cheap mode yet, and I got a K40, and I knew it was going to be terrible, and so then I had bought a Troson AWC 608 controller, and to swap into it with some stepper drivers and everything. And like this was back before like you could get like little boards and step sticks, like those didn't exist yet.
Sure.
So yeah, I had that laser for like an hour before I cut into the case and like threw all this junk into it. And so that was my first laser, and it wasn't a good experience. Shocking. I blew the tube up like 4 days after I got it because the coolant bucket ran dry or something like that. And then but during that point I was like, all right, lasers are awesome.
Totally.
But this was a bad decision for the first laser. So I immediately went out and bought a 60-watt tube and a chiller, and started building I think at the time the goal was 2 foot by 4 foot, like V-wheel frame. And I built like 7 iterations of that before I figured out how to build a laser. So like key points, if you ever decide to build a laser, and you've built a lot of CNC machines, things that will shock you. 1, light doesn't curve to follow your bent gantry. It does not.
I shouldn't be laughing. I shouldn't be laughing, but we've all been there.
Yeah. 2, if you forget to plug in the XH connector to the back of your digital ohm meter, 35,000 volts will arc between the pin contacts. This is a thing.
Okay, that's one I didn't know, but thank you. I'm gonna write it down. Hang on, I'm gonna write it down right now. Yeah.
I remember testing it and being like, "What's that clicky noise?" And I had like turned the lights out so I could like see it, and I was like, "Oh, look at that! It's jumping between the contacts."
Not what you want.
Also, not what you want. No. Also, when you're aligning your laser for your first time, that beam will be anywhere. You don't know where it's shooting. Those mirrors, all bets are off. Like I burnt hole. The scene in Iron Man 3 when Tony is like bending the beam around the shop and cutting everything in half. That was the first alignment of that laser.
Wow.
There's like little burn marks all over my garage and the paint still from just like where that thing was shooting. You didn't go
and buy a quick like laser pointer just to get a red dot to run it through the same?
Well, no. I mean, like that's actually quite difficult to do because you have to like get it perfectly in line with the exit of that tube. Otherwise, like it's worthless.
There's a trick to shoot it the other way around. So you can line it from where the point you mark a point, and then you shoot it back, and then you can actually see how far off you are from where the tube will exit the laser. It's just a ballpoint, but it does help you bring that in a little bit easier.
So there's a tool for that now.
Yeah, there is now.
Then.
I mean, shit. Someone did the same thing you did, and that I probably did, and then went, I don't know, there's a market for this.
Yes. So what I ended up doing was the guy who sat next to me at work at the time. I worked at the Caterpillar Technology Center, so like all the like think tank area.
Awesome.
The guy who sat next to me had a PhD in lasers, and
he couldn't do it for
I
you?
looked at well, that's what I did. I looked at him and I was like, Terry, I built a laser, and he's like, oh, Joe. He was French, and he's like, you built a laser? And this guy was hilarious. I miss Terry. And I was like, yeah, but I'm having a hell of a time aligning it. And he was like, I come over, I help you align the laser. And we hung out for like 4 hours, and he aligned it. He did a great job.
Awesome.
And then
I do have to ask before you go on, do you have any scars on your hands from the laser?
Absolutely not. I was very
okay.
cautious about that. I've never actually hit skin. I did set my shirt on fire one time, but
I did that welding. I caught myself on fire welding, but I do have a pinhole scar on my index finger on my left hand from working with someone who said, I'm firing the laser. And I said, and I remember actually kind of going, don't move your hand, because I didn't want, like, as I pulled off, it was engaged.
It wanted to be a line.
Yeah, it would have just cut straight through. And I just remember going, that was on, and it took me a second to go, oh, it feels like a hot needle had just been poked into my finger, and then I didn't feel anything for the next couple of months in that area. So it was like, it cauterized it straight away. It was a 40-watt laser. The place smelled like a barbecue hut for a while. But I remember looking at him, and he went, I should have told you beforehand. And I was like, yeah. And and he's like, do you want to punch me? And I'm like, no, you'll never do that again. Like, you've learned. And I remember we were sitting there going, okay, I believe I had that video on Facebook. I should share it with everyone. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, you should. That's horrifying.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I shouldn't. I have a rule about being positive on social media, so maybe I shouldn't be like, this is where I had a laser fire through my finger. Thankfully, it was literally a split second. I think if it went longer, I probably would have, it could have really done some damage. But I remember he was like, I'm turning it on, and the mouth didn't engage as quickly as his hand did on the safety.
Yeah, I've never done that. So I set my shirt on fire one time. I had the laser open, and I had a ruler that I was pushing warped stock down with. Okay. And, the gantry comes forward, and all of a sudden, the beam going across the gantry is now reflecting off of the laser into my shirt and shooting me in the chest. And
oh man, that's a nightmare.
Lit my shirt on fire.
That is a nightmare. Do you still have that machine? Is it still up and running?
No, I took it apart last summer when I got the laser that I have currently. It went through 3 more iterations after that. I like making machines more than I like using machines, so that was part of it. It just kept getting better and better.
Sure.
And eventually, though, it was that machine went through 3 tubes. Just for use, not from me screwing up and the children dying or something like that. So I used that laser for 5-6 years. It made lots of things.
And what kind of machines do you have now? You said you've got a few laser machines. What's in your workshop as we speak?
Right now I have my big laser is a 130 watt Ohm Tech. It's 1400 by 900 build area.
Wow. Okay.
You can put 4x8 sheets directly into it. It's amazing.
Yeah. And cut them like butter.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
I cut all of the acrylic for a couple 3D printer companies here in the States, and
awesome.
So being able to just slide sheets in and do stuff like that is really, really useful.
That's the CO2 CO2 laser, right? Of course.
Yeah, that's my CO2 laser, and that's what replaced the Power Blinder 5000 is what I called it.
Awesome. I love the name.
And then I have an Emblazer 2 and an Emblazer Core from Darkly Labs.
Awesome.
Hey, I said it right at the perfect time. Check out Darkly Labs. And I I have a 50-watt MOPA Galvo laser that I just got for supporting Lightburn Galvo.
Awesome. Which just came out this last week. So, started a brand new chapter in Lightburn. And I know I've been watching kind of the social media and all the questions that are coming up. To support Galvo, there's been some changes in some of the basic kind of functionality of modes, and it's kind of been interesting to see people freaking out, not realizing that what's being offered actually will make not just Galvo operators' life easier, but also diode and CO2 operators a lot easier.
Yes. So yeah, we're working through all of the growing pains there, and I'm happy to answer any questions and dive into that. I have one more laser.
Okay.
I have a engravinator from Adam Hiley, which was, what was Adam's?
Don't know that one. The engravinator.
So the engravinator is a 5-watt diode. It's in a box that's about this big.
Yep.
It's about the size of a bread box.
Okay.
And the focus distance is perfectly set so that you can just set it on things. And engrave them. It's got like a 6x6 engraving area, but it's perfect for like putting logos on the side of something, or like we've always talked about like using it to engrave a wall where you just like kind of grid it out.
Yep.
But we haven't done that yet.
I think I'm sure someone has seen that because someone was telling me just chatting on social media, they were saying that they had bought something and it's like it's a box, and you put the box down on material, and then it just kind of engraves. There seems to be a few of those models out, and they were asking.
It's like the Laser Pecker 2 or something like that.
That's the one
that thing terrifies me.
Yeah.
A little diode Galvo, and they're just like, yeah, you can stick it anywhere. And I'm like, diodes will hurt you. They will hurt you if you are stupid. And everybody is stupid when they can run a laser from a phone app.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the questions I wanted to ask, since you have 3 of the main laser types that most people use, do you have a favorite type of laser? Or...
I have a favorite type of laser for specific work.
Good man.
So like, yeah, it's the tool for the job thing, right?
Absolutely. And I think that diode lasers there seems to be this debate always on, especially on social media, that comes up, and they're like, diode lasers is a toy, it's a joke, they don't do what they need to do, that you can't get them to do stuff, and you ask them, what are you doing? And they're like, well, I'm trying to cut clear acrylic, and you're like, physics, my friend. Physics.
Don't do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Diode lasers.
That's impossible.
Yeah, unfortunately. And in fact, even that's a conversation that comes up when people will say, there's new higher powered diode lasers coming to the market. And you always see, will it cut acrylic? Will it do that? And you're like, no, dude, it's not. You can't, as Mr. Scott on the Enterprise used to say, you're going to change the laws of physics. Diode lasers always, as my audience knows, works within the visible light spectrum. And I always use the analogy, if you take a flashlight and you shine it through a window, you can see what's on the other side, because the transmission of light just passes through. And it's the same thing with the diode laser. Yep. Then you get people who love CO2 lasers, and they're like, why can't I engrave to the same level on let's say, a tile or material as the diode lasers? Well, that's because a CO2 laser is kind of like a jackhammer, where a diode laser is more like a surgeon's scalpel. So you can get the same result out of most materials if you cut it lightly once and then you keep scoring, which is exactly the way a diode laser works. You do multiple passes. Where on a CO2 laser, you can just crank up that power, and if you take a jackhammer and you put enough energy into anything, you will get a result. You will get it to burn or to vaporize or cut. And I think those two very basic concepts kind of get lost on a lot of people when they're first entering into the laser market, because it's so easy now to go and buy a $200 or $300 very basic diode laser. But you think lasers, perspex, or plastic, very idea that a CO2 laser is working in the spectrum where it's not even dense. It's not the what am I trying to say? clear. It's not the opaqueness of the material that factors. It's actually the density. It's actually the thickness of the material that the CO2 laser is actually using to cut through. And again, something we like to share with people so they walk in understanding what's going on.
It's really interesting too. When you cut acrylic with a CO2 laser, you can effectively cut an infinite thickness of acrylic. Not infinite, but infinite, because of that, the kerf becomes a beam shaper. So if you have like 2-inch thick acrylic, you could cut that with a K40, just slowly working your way through, because that kerf will slowly refocus the laser every time it goes through it. It's a really interesting thing. But yeah, exactly that. And the other thing that I always try to explain to people is like my 130 watt laser, it's not good for engraving at all.
Right.
It cuts everything that I throw at it. I've cut 3/4 inch plywood with it, but if I wanted to do a photo etch, it just like comes out like a blob, because I don't have the low end power modulation. And when you have a diode, you have effectively 0 to 100 power modulation and a very, very fine beam point, especially when you have a good beam shaped diode that comes on the end blazers. So there's a massive difference between the photo etches that I can do on one of my end blazers versus the engravinator. And it's just simply like the engravinator has a random laser diode that Adam picked up off of AliExpress probably, and the other one has like well thought out optical paths. Right. And that makes a really, really big difference. Just like optics and cameras make all the difference. Like you can put good glass on a cheap body and make the best pictures ever, or cheap glass on the most expensive body and it will look like a year 2005 cell phone. Good glass in front of a laser makes all the difference.
Absolutely. And again, working with the emblazers, especially if you're doing engravings, I tend to clean the lens between jobs, because you never know what's gone up there, and it does make a difference. It just kind of takes that beam and just kind of spreads it out a little bit more, and you can see it on some same job. One's crystal clear, the other one's just slightly out of focus, which is sometimes it happens on the live stream too. If I haven't got my focus exactly dead sharp, and people go, "Why are you out of focus?" I'm like, "I didn't clean my lens." And they're like, "On the laser?" I'm like, "Well, kind of." But yes, exactly that. Glass can make the lens, and understanding also that the way, a laser is just basically photons all moving in the same direction. So what the lens will do is it will bring it in, but it will also start curving out. There is a certain point where those photons will come in, and that's your focus range. And again, very simple concept if you've been around it, but if you're looking at this machine for the very first time, any sort of laser, whether it's a CO2, a galvo, or a diode, and you know what? I know people who pulled out diodes out of CD machines and all the rest of it trying to get a result. If you don't kind of able and understand why you've got to tune those in, it can really make your life miserable.
I remember I've been doing this long enough to remember the time when people were pulling them out of like CD rewritable drives and trying to turn them into cutters, and it was so cool. I kind of miss the struggle maker days when people were doing real weird stuff and like they couldn't just like buy something from SaneSmart or whatever on Amazon. But the good old days, the glory days. What I have learned this year is how important the third mirror alignment is on a CO2 laser. Sure. I didn't realize how massive of a difference it makes to have the height going into the head correct. So many people have taught me over the years, laser technicians from companies like Universal and Epilogue, that putting the beam in the center of the hole of where it comes into the laser head is where you want it. And that's just not true. Where you want it is where it comes into the head and bounces off that mirror and comes straight down the center of the barrel to enter the exact center of the focus mirror and not be angled at all. When you can get that, you get a really nice, properly shaped cone that doesn't hit the air assist nozzle and creates the sharpest beam spot and gives you the absolute best results possible. And it makes such a massive difference when you get it right. I had no idea how wrong I was over the years until I watched a whole lot of videos on the theory of it and why it mattered, and then finally spent literally days trying to get this alignment perfect. And when I did, I was able to increase my cut speed for cutting 1/8 inch acrylic on my laser from 40 millimeters per second at 60% to 65 millimeters per second at 60%.
That's amazing.
Like, that is such a massive difference. Yeah. And the cuts were cleaner, and it was all just alignment, and it absolutely insane. It was incredible. And this is on like not the cheapest Chinese laser you can do, but Ohmtech is like, they're not awful, but they're not good. It's not Thunder, it's not Boss, it's not Epilogue. They're like passable lasers that you have a company that you can yell at. So
I've had no experience, so I'm gonna be like, okay. I'm like,
but they're not like Jeff's discount lasers on eBay. It's like there's a step up in there. So I have no problem saying that with my experience with my laser. It has been a very good tool. It took a lot of tuning to get in, and once I did, though, it has been amazing to use. So I think the biggest thing in that too was going to really good focus mirrors or focus lenses and mirrors from like good reputable companies.
It's all about the glass, right? We were saying that. For diode laser, you really only have to worry about the focusing lens, but for CO2 lasers, you want to make sure that you've got mirrors as well as a lens that is going to take as much of the energy that you're creating and be able to send it down your pathway, so you're able to go and cut and get the results that you want. Joe, what's been your favorite laser project to date?
I
send these curly questions, and I can hear the motors racing. As you didn't tell me you were going to ask that.
So I don't make things very often. That's not true. I make things all the time, but I don't ever like make things for myself. No, this is not my favorite laser project to date. This is a cool laser project that I just did, though. So this is vegan leather that is plant-based. It's made by a company in my hometown called Natural Fiber Welding, and I just did a run of these patches for a local designer, and awesome. I'm really excited about them. You can buy this hat. It's at wildrouted.com. I made them, but my favorite thing that I have made is a laser etched star map from the night I got married.
Awesome.
And a friend of mine wrote the software to generate the map, and then I laser cut the map and cut out the stars and put LEDs behind it, and it like twinkles, and it's a cool thing. It was a anniversary gift for my wife a few years ago.
That's pretty cool. Again, I love one of the things that I absolutely love about doing these live streams and the community that we're building here is seeing how people utilize the technology. And there's always a story behind the things that people create. And that it's awesome to hear that you use that in such a personal way to commemorate something that would have been a milestone in your life.
I think that's my favorite one that I've made.
Awesome. That's great. I'll see whether or not I can even pop up an image on my edit into it and let people see what's going on. So you've obviously you built your own lasers, you've got a number of lasers, you're tinkering around, and somewhere along the line you get tapped on the shoulder by a little company that's growing very, very quickly, that has an amazing user base of creative people out there, and you are now working with Lightburn.
Yeah. So I've been with Lightburn for I'm going to say I've been with Lightburn since the beginning, but for a year. So I've been a beta tester for Lightburn for literally since the beginning.
Sure.
And over the years, I have made tutorials for companies on Lightburn. I've made many of the video tutorials that are like officially Darkly Labs videos. I made a lot of those, and then I had made some video tutorials for Lightburn proper over the years.
Awesome.
And this last year, though, I came on as a software developer / content creator. Yeah.
So all the new videos that are coming out from Lightburn, you've had a handle in creating and basically engaging the audience on some of the new features with Lightburn?
Yeah. So all of the quick tip videos that are like YouTube shorts and that have come out on the social media stuff, most of those are mine. And then the like full length videos, many of those are from one of our other creators named Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are also from me. So if you hear my voice, I worked on it. And if you hear somebody else's voice, that's Daniel. And he is an amazing content creator. He also has his own YouTube channel. It's Modbot Army. And he does lots of 3D printer reviews and laser cutter reviews and stuff. And working with him has been absolutely fantastic because
awesome.
He is a much better video creator than me. I'm very like technically skilled in like how the software works, and I can teach well, but like he can just like, he has a vision for how the videos will look and things. Like he's a video creator.
Awesome,
so
man.
Working with him has been really, really fun over the last few months. Just like learning more about like framing and like where to put B-roll and like just like the storytelling part of trying to make instructional videos. Like I'm really good at like, here's this, yeah, you need to make a rectangle. Here's how a rectangle tool works. And like, here's a couple ways you could use it. And like, he can turn it into a really engaging story. And it's been really fun. So.
No, that's awesome. I mean, one of the things that I love especially the last couple of years is the amount of people who have been adopting Lightburn and sharing their journey and sharing their techniques and sharing how to be able to utilize this software as much as you. I mean, it's really up to your imagination about how you want to apply the tools that Lightburn gives you, and it's just been really fun. I was really lucky a few months ago to introduce Lightburn to a primary school, and then see the kids, literally children under the age of 10, start laying out work in Lightburn in this, sometimes in ways that I would have gone, in a more formal atmosphere. You go, that's wrong. But then when you actually get to the end of it, you go, no, that's right. That's just a completely different intuitive way of being able to get to the same result. And I learn from them all the time.
That's awesome. I love watching people that have no idea what they're doing and like don't know that it's wrong figure out ways to get to places, because they'll get to places with solutions that you're just like, I would have never thought of that. That's better.
Right. I mean, it's an amazing, because it is so intuitive. And you were talking about Adobe before, and I'm a big Photoshop guy, but I hate Illustrator. I could never wrap my head around Illustrator. Every time I've used Illustrator, I've used it more as a pixel pusher or pixel editor than I ever have as a vector software. And recently I had some people come up to me and they're like, we've got this artwork that someone had laid out in Illustrator, and they were like, can you help us fix this? And I'm in Illustrator and I'm like, I don't know the commands. I'm like, I'm not familiar with it. So it's like, just leave it with me. And I literally went into Lightburn, because Lightburn will take a native Illustrator file and went, done, and gave it back to them. They're like, okay, show me how to do it. I said, I didn't do it with your software. And then the minute they saw Lightburn, they were like, how much is that? And I'm like, told them, they're like, okay, we want to get copies. And I'm like, great, but you happen to have an Epilogue machine. And at this point, Epilogue doesn't interface directly. We've got to kind of do a few other things. And that kind of was a bit of a shame, but hopefully in the future, you know, I look forward to a universal laser world where every software can be used with every machine. Whether you want to use Lightburn or something else, that'd be kind of awesome to be able to go and do that. But it's just...
So do we.
Yeah, I'll be the first one to be like, great. I know that speaking to Jason last year, the idea of being able to take Lightburn and take it to a vinyl cutter just kind of blew my mind, because I happen to have a vinyl cutter that I fixed up, works fine. The software happens to be really kind of the minimum amount to get the machine to work, which means that when you use it, I've got to learn how the software is going to then send that to the machine. I would love to be able to go and just into Lightburn and go, done, you know, send it off and get it done. And I know there's a lot of people out there who would also love to see kind of a universal version of Lightburn, whether it's a vinyl cutter or a CNC. You know, even, who knows? 3D printing might be down the track. I have no idea. I see a future of Makerbot, Ultimaker, and Lightburn in the middle. No, that's right. It's like with the announcements of yes. Well, maybe Joe's freaking out on that one. If it happens, you heard it here first. But you know, it is you know, you never know what's going to happen. And I remember the very first time I saw Lightburn. And, you know, after coming from the Kanban days and also learning about lasers and retrofitting these kind of homemade laser machines and kind of going, that's what I've been looking for. And back in the early days where it was just like, I could just put the design in there and just really basically put some text around or just change a couple of points. And, you know, I was just like, wow. And I love the fact that it's always iterating new versions of itself with new features. And you guys are kind of like, you know, you're on the battlefield. I'm sure that it's got to be crazy time every day when you're getting requests and this doesn't work. And, you know, I see all these posts coming up, especially after a new version comes out. And it's like, you know, this doesn't work anymore. And it's like, okay, try this. And it works.
Yeah. It's I think people think we don't test it. And we do every day. I am the person who tests much of the things. For a very long time, my title was literally breaker of software. Before I was like full time, I did my best to break everything possible and go about things the stupidest way I could to try to figure out all of the ways that our users would break the software so that we could try to make it as intuitive as possible. And that's been a big part of what I've done this year, is work to make things more discoverable. So if you've noticed in the last few versions, we've added a lot of weird wizards, like the print and cut wizard, and like everything's got tooltips. That's all been me, because my whole deal is helping people make things easier and make things better, like democratize manufacturing. So when I came on, I told Jason my goal is to make Lightburn easier to use, more discoverable. When you walk up to it, you can just think no. There's a lot to do still. There is one of the other developers and I were joking the other day that we've been working with the software for literally years now, and we don't know how to use it because there's just so much. I agree. Like Photoshop, I don't think there's a person in the world that knows every function of Photoshop and how to utilize it. There's one person that knows every function of Lightburn and how to utilize it, but it's not me. Yeah. I learn things literally every day. Sure. And it's my job to know as much as I can. So we've built so much functionality into this tool, and we're adding so much more. And I think my favorite part of it all, though, is like I literally just work on what I want. Our method of prioritization, we always joke, is the shiny method. So whatever's shiny this week is what we're working on, and that's resulted in some pretty
that's awesome
fun additions to the software.
That's very cool.
Like the center finder wizard recently, that was like just a fun project that I wanted to work on, because I do a lot of things like coasters and things with round stock, and I was like, this would be a cool thing to have. And I've got a whole list of things that I want to work on that are in like the similar vein of that. So but yeah, right now Galvo is the shiny thing, so we're all working on Galvo tools, and there's so much that we've held back just because we needed to get a functional version out,
sure,
to make our timeline. So yeah, the next few months are going to be a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
So.
And I think that, you know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, when prices went up, and if you've ever used an Adobe suite or you've used professional CNC software, I mean, it's $20 here is, you know, some people got so upset about the idea that, but you can see right now that a year ago, or let's say 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, if Jason wanted to start, you know, noodling around with Galvo, well, you know, he wouldn't have been able to push it and release it so quickly. So that's where, you know, subscriptions go, supporting the software goes. I think it's so important because just in this short period of time, you can see that the company that started off with Jason, and then another person, and then, you know, another coder, and now a whole bunch of people, which is awesome to be able to do it. The return is all the functionality that you're seeing now, plus, and you know, we don't know what the next kind of iteration of laser technology is going to be, but I'm pretty confident that when it gets into the hands of hobbyists and makers and even small businesses, that's going to be a focus of what Lightburn's going to concentrate on. Yeah.
So I was employee number, if we don't count Jason, I was full-time employee number 3.
There you go.
And that was a year ago. And now we are at 23 employees, not all full-time, but 23 people worldwide. We've got people on every continent now. And
there's a penguin with a laser in Antarctica right now that is trying out.
Okay. not every continent, I guess. All right. Fair.
When Lightburn has a employee on the moon, I'll give you Antarctica for free.
Well, I mean, so like apparently, you know, from all the conspiracy theorists I hear, like Australia is actually just the guards of the ice wall for the flat Earth. So like that's kind of, and we've got somebody in Australia and somebody in New Zealand. So like, kind of, if you guys are really guarding the ice wall, are you? People want to know.
Mate,
people want to know, Gil.
Before COVID hit, I went and did some work at NASA with some students and stuff, and I got to be involved in one of their bouncing off a laser off the moon to measure how far away it was, and I was
That's
like,
so cool.
I know, it was again, you know what? It actually was due to the maker community, because we happened to be walking in a place, and someone was there who happened to go, I watch you on YouTube. And I was like, you do? I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. And then he was like, do you guys want to come back and we're going to do something? You guys can stand in the back and all the rest of it. And he was kind enough to go, do you want to hit the button that's going to fire the laser? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is like the ultimate, like for someone who does laser stuff. And I was like, all right, well, I've just proven what I knew, but now I'm like, the world ain't flat as far as I'm concerned. But I'm a guy, I'm a science guy. What can I say? But yeah, that was. I should have asked them if they were using Lightburn. You know, wouldn't it be cool if they were lining everything up with Lightburn? That would have been awesome.
Yeah.
But I was involved in the math part of it. I just pressed the button. But it was
that's the most important job. Without the button pusher, it would have never happened.
Yeah, I got the big money, like, you know. But I did get a thrill to know that I was involved in something that had to do with the moon. So, it's a lot of fun. Joe, I want to thank you so much for coming on and hanging out with us. I would love to open an invitation for you to come back, and there's a lot of things that I would love to kind of grill you on, not put you in the hot seat, but this was more an introduction of the work that you do, your background, as well as what you do for Lightburn and for all of us. First of all, on behalf of everyone, let me just say thank you for all the tweaks that you've been putting in. All those different, whether it's holding your cursor above a tool and understanding what that tool is, or now I forgot what they're called, the center finder and the
wizards.
The wizards. That's the word I was going to use. I was going to use something else, but even from the Boolean functions, the wizard there, instead of guessing and trying to understand.
That wasn't me.
Okay,
that was Jason.
Okay. We're not gonna thank Jason. That's not what I mean. Who's he? I mean,
Without him, nothing would happen.
Yes, absolutely. No, well, I mean, Jason's pretty amazing in his own right, and we've definitely sung his praises. But it's great to know a little bit about the people behind what's going on in Lightburn, and it's just awesome for me to have this conversation just on the fact that I was one of the people watching Makers on Tap and listening to the podcast and seeing some of your projects either on Twitter,
thank you,
or on Instagram, and I remember seeing an article about you as a maker on Darkly Labs website and going, this guy looks interesting. Like, there's someone else that you can connect with that happens to be interested in lasers and laser technology and it's making some really cool things. So would you be willing to come back and have a chat with us again?
Absolutely. I'd love to come on and dig into the milk crate CNC that I've been working on.
Absolutely.
And anything. I like talking about making stuff.
Awesome.
And I don't do it near enough anymore.
So, you've got an open door policy. I'm going to bother the hell out of you and get you in here.
Awesome.
We'll see if we can get Dominic as well. I don't know how we're going to get 3 windows up, but maybe we can.
That'd be so much fun.
I know, because Dominic is a lot of fun, but I might even have to kind of invest in something else so that we can get all 3 of us up. But we'll do that. And thank you so much for the time today. I'd like to thank Joe for taking the time out, talking with us here at the Laser Livestream, and sharing his history and his interest of lasers with us all. I'm looking forward to having him back on so we can explore some of his other projects like the Milk Crate CNC and other laser projects that are coming up. If you like this, hit that subscribe button and bell icon so you don't miss out on what's coming up next. And until I see you next time, go make something amazing.